Sorry, we were 5 minutes late. We get some business to take care of, and we were waiting for one of our colleagues got caught in traffic, but I'm glad she's here now. I'd like to call this meeting to order on Monday, April 23rd, 2018. Confirmation of agenda. Any additional item, or we can confirm agenda? Confirm. Okay, thank you. Confirmation of minute of 26 March 2018, that the Ottawa Police Service Board confirmed the minutes of the 26 March 2018. On the minute? Thank you. Declaration of interest? Committee meeting report from committee chairs and minute. We have the Policy and Governance Committee draft minute from the 4th April 2018, that the Ottawa Police Service Board received this report for information. But before we receive it, I'll turn it over to my colleague, the chair of the Policy Governance Committee, Member Nicholson, to give us a little bit overview on the committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Policy and Governance Committee met on April 4th. We discussed amendments to a series of board policies as part of a regular review that we do of board policies, and I am pleased to let you know that all these changes are before the board for approval this evening, so I won't go into the nitty-gritty. Thank you. I think it's item 12 or something on our own agenda.
So, received. Thank you. Inquiries. Any inquiries at this time? See none. Item number 1, the Chief's verbal report. We'll hold item number 1. Item number 2 is National Capital Area Crime Stopper. Our friends from the Crime Stoppers are here for presentation, so we'll hold item 2. Item 3 is the update on accommodation, presentation by Director General Deborah Fraser. We'll hold item 3 as well. Item number 4, review of board policies, Executive Director report, that the Ottawa Police Service Board approved the amendment to policies contained in this report as endorsed by the Policy and Governing Committee. On item 4? Okay, thank you. Item number 5, renewal of Adobe Enterprise term licensing agreement, that the Ottawa Police Service Board approved the renewal of Adobe Enterprise term licensing agreement through Soft Choice LP for 3 years term from February 13, 2018 to February 12, 2021 at approximately annual cost of $75,785.19, excluding taxes. On the item? Okay. It's just the licensing renewal. Item number 6 is appointment of Special Constable, Ottawa Police Service. Is the Chief's report that the Ottawa Police Service Board approved the appointment of Benjamin Split as a Special Constable pursuant to Section 53 of the Police Service Act in accordance with the terms and conditions set forth in the approval of appointment form. On the appointment? Okay. And also we have the same item number 7 and number 8. Number 7, Special Constable pursuant to Section 53, accordance with the term conditions set approval. So there's no name on that item. Special Constable OC Transport. And item number 8 is reappointment of a Special Constable OC Transport. On item 8, okay. Thank you. Item number 9, we have public delegation to speak on item number 9. So if we can hold item 9 till we hear from the resident. Item number 10, workplace injury, illness, and incident 2017 annual report. On the item, we see. Item 11, the Ottawa Police Service Board received this report for information, is the wellness strategy update. On item received. Item number 12 is the Ottawa Police Service Board received this report for information, and it is a complaint report, Part 5, Police Service Act, first quarter. And before we receive this item, I really sincerely want to thank the Chief's Executive Officer, Scott Neistat, and his team for making the necessary change to make it friendly use and better understanding the complaint report. So, Chief, I'd like to acknowledge our staff on a job well done. Thank you. On the item 12? Okay. Item 13, the Board Monitoring Requirement Status Report, first quarter 2018. Received. Item number 14, Legal Service Status Report, first quarter. I believe the Vice Chair has a question with this direction to legal. Go ahead, you can do it now so we don't have to open.
I just wondered if it would be possible with this report to have comparables. We just have 1 year now, so in future, is it possible that we just have so we can see if there's a trend or change or something that stands out?
Certainly. Actually, we can include that in the second, in the midterm or mid-year one as well. Certainly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. And on the item, Legal Service Status Report, received. Item number 15, Report on SIU Investigation. That on the item, received. Item 16, it's Outstanding Board Inquiries in Motion, April 2018, that the Ottawa Police Service Board received this report for information. Received. Item 17 and letters of commendation. The Chief is report that the Ottawa Police Service Board received this report for information. See, thank you. Just a question to Director General. Director General, on item number 10, the workplace injury, and I noticed they're talking about increase in, the number didn't increase as much, but the time for recovery, it seems increase. Can you just explain it a little bit? Because it seems like if you look on the statistics of 2015, 2016, 2017, the number, the percentage did not change a lot. As a matter of fact, it decreased, but the time, if you look for the recovery, it was longer. Can you just shed some light on this, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What you're seeing in this report is the first full year, being 2017, where the presumptive legislation that was passed, which permitted PTSD, sometimes referred to as OSI as well, but PTSD to be recognized as a WSIB acknowledged illness. And so for us, that's meant, and we capture this in the report, that there's been a significant increase in the number of PTSD-approved claims. In 2015, for example, there were 2 that were recognized by WSIB. In 2017, there were 21. And those kind of that condition requires more recovery, perhaps, than a very simple musculoskeletal injury, and that's what's explaining the significant change in the severity. And you're quite correct, Mr. Chair. There's 550 hours in this report compared to 173 2 years ago. So we now have a feel for the kind of impact that the presumptive legislation is having on our service, as well as more awareness of the occurrence of this condition within our members.
Thank you very much. I know we received that item, but I thought it was necessary to explain the lower percentage, but the higher cost on this one. So thank you for that. And we go to the Chief's report or the presentation. Perhaps we can do the presentation for the National Capital Area Crime Stopper, and then we'll come back to the Chief's verbal report. So for our guests to. So when Mr. McMullen, the President of National Capital Area Crime Stopper, coming to the podium, I'd like to thank Mr. McMullen and his leadership and his team and his board of directors on great work helping our our service, and we really like to thank you on behalf of my colleague, the board here, for all the hard work your team is doing. And obviously we follow you on Twitter, and we see the great partnership you have with OPS. So we'll turn it over to you, Mr. McMullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's much appreciated. We are active, we are busy, and we continue to do good things. So while I give you the semi-annual update, I just thought I'd throw some photos up, just some of the events. For those of you that don't necessarily follow us on Twitter, you can see what our team is up to. So first, Mr. Chair, thanks for the opportunity. This is our 13th presentation to the Police Services Board. It's my 10th. And it's something that we really enjoy doing, not only sharing with you and your colleagues, but with the public as well. So it's important to have opportunities like this. So thanks for facilitating that. You know, our board of directors continues to be a strong and focused group that are engaged in helping law enforcement solve, resolve, and prevent crime. So we're active. Some of my board colleagues are with me today. Just to acknowledge them, Jim Tugwell, Wayne Bissett, our past president, and Miss Lee Underwood joins me. And ask Constable Getz to come up. She's our coordinator, and I thought it'd be nice for her to see what it's like to do this, and we can look forward to hearing from her in the future, perhaps. Sadly, earlier this year, we lost one of our board members after a long battle with cancer. Steve Merrills, been on our board for a number of years, served in a variety of capacities, most recently as our board secretary, well known to Ottawa Police, involved in your fraud group that helps solve and prevent crimes on its own merits. So just sad to report that. As you may know, in early February we launched an initiative targeting illegal crime guns in our community, and it's a 90-day program that we've launched in order to target any crime guns, so the seizure of any crime guns, and we're offering the full $2,000 cash reward for that. The purpose is to raise awareness and make people aware of the safety factor of calling Crime Stoppers and sharing information that can be vital to law enforcement. So we're looking forward to continued results on that front. Our board is going to be participating. Some of us are off to Hamilton to attend a Canadian conference of Crime Stoppers programs. As you may know, there's 38 different programs across our province, and they'll be well represented. So we're bringing our youth volunteers with us again, and of course our coordinators will be making the trip. And I'm happy to report that the program continues to be successful. You know, in 2017, we saw our tip volume increase from 4,200, just over 4,200 tips, to 5,359 in 2017. It was our largest number of anonymous tips we've ever received, and it's helped police recover over $72,000 in stolen property, seize over $43,000 in illegal drugs. 3 firearms were recovered directly as a result of Crime Stoppers tips. So we know the program works, and it continues to be an effective tool for law enforcement to use. Much of our success, I believe, is our engagement with the community. Being out at community events pays dividends, whether that's at community safety nights, whether that's attending a parade or community barbecues. All of those opportunities for us to raise awareness with the public about Crime Stoppers contributes to the increased number of tips, and that has an impact, as we all know. Some of those events are fun and exciting. Some of them are post-incidents, and we've had enough of those incidents to attend. But I'm also encouraged, because we're out there, just like our law enforcement partners are, before these incidents, whether it's in vulnerable sectors or other areas of our community. So engaging at the grassroots level with local communities certainly pays off. We've got some great relationships. We've got some great partnerships out there, and those continue to help us drive up those tip numbers. January was Crime Stoppers Month. We participated at a wide variety of events, including Ottawa Community Housing events, Carleton University. Constable Getz and myself had a chance to speak to third and fourth year criminology students. We attended events at Carleton University, at Algonquin College, provided a presentation at the Boys and Girls Club, and of course all of our regular parades and other events. So quite good. And I'd also like to thank our media partners, because without spreading that word, we can do it on social media, but having the professional media, whether that's the television broadcasters, the print media, and the radio media, getting their message out there continues to be effective, and we're really pleased to see so much. You know, our Crime Gun initiative, we were able to secure free advertisement from all of the radio stations around town. And that's important for getting the message out. So we're encouraged to see that, and it's really a positive contribution that they do. So every time they mention us, whether it's in a news story or print media, when they mention the Crime Stoppers Anonymous option, that helps drive up our volume, and so we're thankful and grateful for them. We also got to participate at Bell's Corners community meeting that was held to help raise awareness about creating a neighborhood watch program, and I was pleased to speak on behalf of Crime Stoppers and share information about anonymous reporting. Sometimes people are reluctant to come forward with information. Sometimes they're reluctant to call the police. And Crime Stoppers creates a safe environment for the public to come forward without having to worry about fear of reprisal, to never have to testify in court, to never have to really be engaged other than sharing that information. And that's what makes the program so successful. And I think that we've seen an increase in the number of tips because the public is willing to come forward and share that. So it is a safe option. You know, in the fall, we were acknowledged with an award from Crime Prevention Ottawa, the long-standing contribution award, and it was a real honor for our board members that were able to attend and our volunteers to seek that kind of recognition. You know, we're kind of a quiet organization. We don't get to trumpet our success. We don't get to share the full value of our success stories with the public, even sometimes with our law enforcement partners. But I can tell you that it does work. And I think the numbers articulate that message. Constable Getz has been busy out in the community providing all sorts of information to groups at Carlington, Ledbury, Britannia, Vanier, and those continue to yield positive results for us. Again, it's that one tip. One tip can have vital information that can help us prevent and solve crimes. You know, we know it works. We had tremendous success in 2017, and we're looking forward to another solid year with Crime Stoppers. So thanks for this opportunity, because it's important for us, one, I think, to share that return on investment for you as a board, and for our police service partners. Thanks for all that you do. You know, we couldn't have done that launch that we did with the Crime Gun Initiative without the tremendous support from the OPS media group. They were instrumental in helping us craft not only a message, but secure us some opportunities to be out in the public media, on the airwaves and print media, and on the radio. So thanks to them, because they were very, very instrumental in making it successful. Happy to take any questions.
First of all, thank you very much, Mr. McMullen, but I'm going to turn it to the Chief for his comment. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't ask you any questions. All I want to do is thank you. Richard, to you and your board, you are volunteers. However, the number of hours that you invest in your own personal time towards making sure that Crime Stoppers is the success it is truly a testament to your commitment to keeping Ottawa safe. And Constable Getz, Jacqueline, thank you so much for what you're doing for Crime Stoppers. It is a tremendous partnership that we have between the police service and Crime Stoppers, and we are seeing a healthy program because of the success of the team and your investment in working in the community. You are at, I think, more events than the mayor goes to. But don't tell him that.
All right.
But you are out there, and you're quite right. There's some members of our community that are reluctant to call the police service directly. And it's as a result of your direct presence in those communities where you start making sure that people can call you out honestly. We're seeing the success. And with some of the challenges that we are facing in our community around crime guns, your willingness to partner and to invest and to ensure that you're doing your part to keep Ottawa safe is truly meaningful, and we really appreciate it. So, merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. McMullen. And again, on behalf of our board, I want to thank you and your board of directors and our staff from OPS working with you. Any questions from my colleague to Richard? Well, again, Richard, thank you very much, sir. On the item, I2, receive. Thank you very much. Now we'll turn it to the Chief. Item number 1, Chief's verbal report. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll first start off by, as the board may be aware, in Toronto just this afternoon, they are facing a critical incident where a van has plowed through a sidewalk and either killed or injured a number of individuals. Certainly our thoughts are with the victims and their families and also the first responders that are dealing with this incident. The incident is still very much under investigation, and our officers are working with Toronto Police to gather as much information as possible. One of the questions that we're often asked is can these types of incidents be prevented, and specifically in our community? What I can tell you is that when we do have planned events, demonstrations, you will see a number of new physical features with respect to security, whether it's our officers with carbines, barricades, or assault trucks that are parked to prevent these methods of being successful. We've been very successful in those planned events. The issue is, as we've seen across the world, is when just in the day-to-day activities, what can we do as a community to prevent these? The reality is that there are certain individuals that are using this method in order to cause death and injury to individuals, regardless of what their cause is, and they've had some success. But our officers and we continue to be vigilant, and we continue to work with our intelligence partners in order to identify any potential threats that can take place in our communities. We continue to ask the public to remain vigilant and to be aware of their surroundings, and to report anything suspicious if they see it. So that's just an update from the events in Toronto. And I want to bring to your attention the issue of guns and gangs in our community. And as you're well aware, we continue to see some shootings in our city, and our officers have been working very hard to hold offenders accountable through a series of initiatives. To date, 17 illegal guns have been seized, and up to now we've completed over 290 compliance checks on people with court-ordered conditions, and several investigations are still and are currently underway. As a result of a guns and gangs investigation, 4 male suspects were arrested at a West End mall just over a week ago. These 4 males were in possession of 2 loaded handguns, over 1 kilo of cocaine, and Canadian currency. And in relation to this investigation, a 5th man was arrested, and numerous warrants were executed at residences, which led to 2 more loaded handguns being seized, along with fentanyl and other types of drugs. One of the men that was wanted for a shooting at the Algonquin campus last summer, while another arrested, was also facing numerous charges from project sabotage. So as I've previously told the board, there's a nucleus of individuals that we are seeing continue to be involved in these, and these are the individuals that we are actively investigating. These arrests were possible because of the strong investigative work done by our officers and the work that is being done by our frontline patrol officers in keeping accounts on these offenders. I want to thank, in particular, a passerby, a guy by the name of Johnny Raposo, who came to the aid of one of the officers who was injured during a foot chase to arrest some of the suspects. The officer underwent surgery and is healing, but was expected to be off for some time as he heals. We're also seeing how the community is working with us to help find a solution. The introduction of a new neighborhood watch program in Bell's Corners at the beginning of April is an important step for communities to take across our city, those who don't have neighborhood watches. And there's a province-wide gun amnesty, and we're seeing some results in that. Here in Ottawa, to date, we've recovered over 200 firearms, which have been turned over to our police service. And we know that a certain percentage of the crime guns that we are seizing from across the city is as a result of break-and-enters from area residents. We'd also like to encourage residents to take advantage of this amnesty to get rid of any unwanted weapons that they may have in their homes. Again, we messaged that not to bring the firearms into the police station, to call us, and an officer will come and pick it up at your convenience. And the community still has until next Monday to qualify under this amnesty. I'll give you an update as far as the cannabis readiness update. In February, I committed to keeping the board informed on the progress of the cannabis legislation readiness project. Based on the status of the legislation, we are aiming for a fall implementation timeline. Deputy Chief Skinner, who is away right now in Victoria with the CCP Victims of Crime Committee, her and her team have been working collaboratively with the city as part of an integrated cannabis legislation team. The integrated team is working through a number of issues such as enforcement and administration. I know that a concern of the community and the board is how we will be prepared to address impaired driving. I'm happy to report that in terms of training, our organization is well positioned. We presently have 219 standardized field sobriety test trained officers on the front line, and we anticipate having another 49 additional staff trained by July. We also have 10 active drug recognition trained officers on the front line, and we anticipate to get an additional 12 being trained by September. In the absence of a federally approved screening device, we anticipate the impaired driving enforcement regime will be similar to what we have in place today, meaning the use of standard field sobriety testing and drug recognition experts. There are still a number of unknowns that will have to be addressed as a result of potential changes to the legislation, and we all know that parts of the bills are still before the Senate and have yet to receive final approval. Our work plans are currently on track, and we continue to work with the province and, again, our city partners to make sure that we are ready. With respect to our recruitment campaign, I want to briefly update the board on some of our recruitment efforts. Superintendent Sterling Hartley has been assigned as the senior leader of our sworn officer recruitment strategy. As we have presented to the board in the past, the work he and his team are doing is designed to streamline the recruitment process and build capacity in the outreach recruitment area and background check area. This work is key to successfully recruiting up to 500 officers over the next 5-year period. As part of those efforts, we've developed a recruitment campaign to support the work of our recruiters. That campaign is being rolled out starting next weekend with a new web content and includes ads in local movie theaters. The campaign will grow in the coming weeks and months with a new partnership with the OSEG, the Ottawa Sports Entertainment Group, social media content, highway-facing signage on our facility at Elgin Street, and printed material in multiple languages. And for the board's information, 14 recruits just returned from the Ontario Police College, and another 16 are prepping to go there in 2 weeks. Members of our youth section met with the Overbrook residents to discuss issues relating to their children and the law in the first Ask Our Officer event held at the Rideau Rockcliffe Community Resource Centre last week. Parents in attendance had an opportunity to connect with officers and have their personal family questions answered on issues ranging from human trafficking to how to help their youth deal with negative peers. The intimate setting gave parents the chance to have one-on-one dialogues with officers, not only getting advice and guidance on how to support their child, but also giving our team some valuable feedback, insight into their lives. And this initiative will continue throughout our city, and encourage any board members or councillors who are interested in having that type of event take place in their wards just to give us a shout. An update on a downtown fire that took place, and just to indicate that our civilian SWAR members work together in serving and protecting our city. After receiving a garbled 911 call where the caller abruptly hung up, our comm center agent sent police officers to a downtown address. Officers arrived to see a house engulfed in flames and bravely entered the dwelling to rescue the caller. The caller had mental health issues and refused to leave the residence. With the house in flames and the man refusing to leave, the officers were able to deploy a conducted energy weapon to take control of him and get him safely out and to the hospital. A number of officers, 3 of them, I believe, were treated for smoke inhalation. I want to commend those officers for their heroic efforts. And finally, I want to end with an excerpt from a letter we received from a parent thanking Constable Jordan Blonde earlier this month. It shows the impact of our officers and our first responders, colleagues, have on the people we serve. You responded to a 911 call for a drug overdose. You were the first officer on scene and immediately started first aid on a young lady. That lady is my daughter. I want to thank you for saving her life that day. I know that it really is a team effort, that there were many first responders on site that morning. Please let them know that I say thank you, not only on my behalf, but on behalf of my wife, my son, and my daughter's son. An entire family is grateful for the actions taken that day. We rushed to the hospital when we found out what happened. We were told that our daughter would probably not make it through the night and to prepare for the worst. Her first words when she woke up were, "I do not want to die. Because of your efforts and the efforts of others, she is alive." Mr. Chair, further to subject questions, that's my verbal report.
Thank you, Chief. And my colleague, a question. Member Hubley, Councillor.
Thank you, Chief, for that excellent report. I just have one question on it. Where you gave us the update on the cannabis strategy, you mentioned over 400 officers trained. Were we able to do that locally, or did we have to go outside? The reason I asked that is 2 meetings ago we talked about how the OPP were sending officers to Florida.
Mr. Chair, so we have 219 of the SFST officers, and what we've been able to do is partner with the province and partner with other local agencies, and we've been able to do that training here locally at the Professional Development Center. So that's a good thing. We're able to deliver that training locally. The drug recognition experts, we are still required. Part of the training is done locally, and it's done through the RCMP, but there's still a component of that training where we are required to send officers down out of country in order for them to finish their certification process. What I can tell you that the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police are pushing towards a Made in Canada solution, and one of the models that is being explored is the Quebec model, where they actually use actors to simulate behaviors that are exhibited through drug as a result of ingesting drugs. That seems to be successful in Quebec. So CCP is looking at seeing and working with Public Safety Canada and the RCMP to see if they can implement a nationwide, a Canada-made solution and implement that Canada-wide.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Member Hubley. Mr. Vice Chair.
We received an excellent presentation at CAPG on that, which answered an awful lot of questions and gave us a really good update. So perhaps the Executive Director would be able to pass that presentation on to all the members. Thank you very much.
Any other question to the Chief's report? On the Chief's verbal report? Received. Thank you. And on behalf of the Board, Chief, thanks to our member who dealt with that morning, because we were somewhere and we heard about the fire in that apartment. I think it was a good news story at the end of the day. Thanks to our member. So we received the Chief's verbal report. We have item number 9, and we have a public speaker about it. Is Ms. Cheryl? Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. But I thought. Sorry. So again, we'll get Ms. Cheryl to come up to speak on item number 9, because the other item 3 is our staff. We can delay our staff a little bit for the public. So. I know. again, Chair, and welcome to our board meeting. So, as you know, you've been here before. You'll have 5 minutes to address the board. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you, and to the board, to chair and board. I'm here about the service initiative. So this is the last quarterly review, I understand, and there's a final closeout report coming next month. But we still have concerns. I still have concerns, and our community does. So we want to ensure that there will be some evaluations of these changes, because these are dramatic changes, and what the criteria for the evaluations are. We heard 3 years ago that we would be seeing those, but so far there hasn't been anything. We understand it's early on. That's what we were told at the CAG meeting. It's too early to evaluate, but I hope that the board will prescribe some kind of schedule where you will see evaluations coming that we will be able to see in the reports and come and speak at. So to me, that's not clear at this point. Because we've lost all the neighborhood officers and you've doubled the areas of the CPOs. So I still have a lot of concerns about how this is all working. We see the increase in gun violence. So we hope that you will prescribe some way that the evaluations will come back. We also see that there are some changes that have been happening. So we understand the Bike and Beat unit is coming back in 2019. Had hoped it would come back in 2018, but 2019 is better than nothing. And that I saw in the report the background checks may come back to some of the service desks as well. So I understand there will be changes, and we want to be able to see those and be able to come and speak to them if we have concerns. So we just wonder how that will happen. I see in the December report that there was a review of the frontline deployment, and there was some fine-tuning happened, and 4% of the changes were external facing, but it didn't say what those were, so there was no clarity in that. I also have a question, and the chief's report confused me more, as to the number of officers. Because again, in the report, it states that you'll be increasing the officers, increasing by 75 officers starting in 2016, and I understood they were phased in 25 per year. But I've also seen reports in the media that we're actually at lower amounts of officers than we had 5 or 10 years ago. So even though we've added a few, we're still behind. But then I heard you talk, and I missed part of it, about recruiting 500 officers. So perhaps the board could ask for the next meeting to have some kind of chart that explains where we were at 5 or 10 years ago with officers, how many we've got now, and then this future, if we're adding 500 officers, that's very encouraging, but I'm confused on all of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I turn it to the chief to answer some of your questions, but I think my colleague Suzanne Velikat, she sits with the SI working group. Maybe she can tell you something about the report, and then we'll turn it to the chief and the director general, because I believe there's 2 questions, one for the chief, one for the Suzanne. Madame Velikat.
Thank you, Madame Perron. I too asked, I guess it was last month, I asked the chief for a full report on the SI, full disclosure of everything that had been reviewed, how it's going to be monitored going forward, how we can evaluate the work that was done in the last year, how much did it cost. So we're very interested in knowing all of the details, and I will be sure to let you know when that report is coming to the board. So thank you for your questions today. They're very apropos.
Thank you.
Merci, Madame Velikat. I'll turn over to the chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we will, if the board directs us, and part of our plan is to come back with an evaluation of the program. So you'll see the May report come out that talks about the closeout. And we've always committed to doing a full evaluation. And I know that hopefully we'll be able to work with, in some way or another, the community advisory group to be able to to feed us as to what you'd be looking for in an evaluation plan. So if that works for you, we will be coming back with evaluation on the service initiative. The other piece, and I think the other point, is that we'll work with the community to identify what's to be included in that evaluation. The other piece on the bikes and beats, I just want to be clear that the functions never disappeared. The unit that was dedicated to do that was rolled into patrol. We've continued to have officers working the beats and riding the bikes in our communities. That has not stopped. We will, and that will happen in 2018 as well. They're just getting ready, getting their training back for the bikes. And what we have done is for 2019 is rededicate a number of officers to that function on a full-time basis. So as opposed to rolling in patrol, we've created that new bikes and beats unit. And the other piece around the number of officers, I've seen those reports in the media as well. They are not accurate. What we will do is we'll come back to the board at our next board meeting, outlining exactly what the numbers are with respect to going back to the number is quoted as 2012. We'll go back and we'll give you the facts with respect to the number of officers that we have budgeted on strength.
Thank you. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you, Cheryl. Before we receive the item 9, Chief, I have a couple of questions. If you go back to which is second page, talks about implementation planning is underway for the establishment of alternate response unit. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? I'm not sure who's going to speak about this.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can speak to that. The alternative response unit is a unit that we've looked to strike up to take off some of the higher frequency, lower level criminal investigations. SI established a process that was used to divert those investigations from the front line. A lot of them are taken through online reporting now, and what we found is many of those are going to our criminal investigators, and the volume of them is quite high. So what SI has done is undertaken to look at some different ways to process those, to use a number of different officers who will look at them on as a larger group. We'll do analysis around them, and we'll build the broadcasts. We'll do the initial level investigations to try and triage them before we actually send them to an investigator to complete an investigation on them. This will allow us to cull through them more quickly. Will allow them to only send the ones that have higher solvency factors to the criminal investigators, and just kind of streamline on how we're working through that system.
So it would be fair to say this process is not going to create any delay. As a matter of fact, will clear up some of the less solvents. Like, I'm trying to understand, is this going to create another level of screening or delay? That's because if I read it, you're having a different process.
So it actually should achieve quite the opposite of that. We receive in the area of 15,000 of these investigations a year. They're going to be triaged to investigators or officers who are doing nothing but looking at those, culling through them, so that we can respond to complainants and victims more quickly, and we can actually look at the investigations for solvability and either close them out or do the initial investigations to send on to an investigator. So it should create more timely response and a better and more effective response to those investigations.
Okay, if I have one more question, if you don't mind. As a separate initiative within demand and management of Garden Mental Health Patient Project was launched to improve police hospital transition for persons with mental health issue who are in crisis. So can you explain to me, like, what will this do? Is that to have a process in place so we don't have 2 police officers waiting at the hospital with patients? Is that to reduce, to the benefit of all, to understand what is this supposed to do? Because it says here, OPS is collaborating with area hospitals to standardize the transfer of care procedure. So how you plan to do this?
So I'm going to let Superintendent McKenna respond to that, but the initial, the purpose of that is, again, to try and make sure we have the right officers spending the least amount of time doing something like guarding a scene at a mental health institution or a health institution, so we can get our officers back on the street. I'm going to let Superintendent McKenna speak to the actual specifics of that project.
Mr. Chair, what you referenced, I believe, is the Health IM program that we're working through right now, installing within our service. And what that will do is when an officer goes on scene, they will gather the information that's involved. They'll share it with the hospital, so when they do arrive at the hospital, they have that information about that person. It's also on a go-forward basis, so if we do have prior involvement or the hospital has prior involvement, the officer on scene will know that information. The hospital as well will know if we've been involved with that person for a number of times. It will also help us deal with that person if they need other services in the community via our mental health unit team.
So in the past, Superintendent used to have two officers with one patient, and sometimes they have to wait quite a bit of time to be able to leave the patient, so they have to wait for a doctor or a nurse to take that. Is that process still in place as we speak now?
Well, right now, depending on the situation, we need to stay at the hospital, or we do need to stay at the hospital when we apprehend a person under the Mental Health Act. We're also working through a memorandum of understanding with their area hospitals, so that if we do bring someone to the hospital, that there is a process that can be facilitated instead of us waiting at the hospital for 4 to 5 hours. So they would triage it as let's say a category 1, that we would stay based on the behavior of the person we brought. A level 2, we may not stay, and a level 3, no, the hospital would assume carriage of that person. So we're working through that with the hospitals at this moment to have a memorandum of understanding signed with our area hospitals.
If I could just build on what Superintendent McKenna said, the Health IM initiative, it's a software package that we've purchased that other police services have also used, and it's a package that allows us to share information with the hospitals in a real-time way, so that the transfer of information and transfer of knowledge both ways happens a lot quicker, so that by the time the officer arrives at the hospital, the assessment is done, and that it reduces the time that our officers are required to spend at the hospital.
Any other question from a colleague on item 9? All right, that's good news, good progress. On the item 9, receive. Thank you, and I believe that will now would go to. I know you're looking at me. Item number 3, we have a presentation from the DG, Director General Fraser. Ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I'll kick off the presentation as Deborah and Lisa Bianco are getting ready. This presentation, Mr. Chair, is meant to provide the board with some important information about the issue of accommodations and the trends that we are seeing. As the board is aware, over the last few years, there's been more of a focus on employee wellness and ensuring that the various needs of employees are recognized and accommodated by employers. That's true for every police service and large employers in the province, in fact, across the country. As you'll see at the police service, that conversation has led to more employees being willing to seek out accommodations for a variety of issues they face, from health to family status issues. It's important that we support these individuals when they come forward with requests that meet the criteria set out by human rights law. Along with that, we're seeing some downstream consequences on our duty to accommodate in terms of staffing and the concerns that it's creating amongst our members. We are focused on this whole issue, and we need to ensure that we follow the law and that we have a rigorous process to evaluate accommodations and utilize our resources as effectively as possible. We also need to ensure that the placement of accommodated employees does not unfairly hinder the career planning of other employees. So this presentation shows you where we are with that conversation and how we are working to meet the staffing challenges that this issue presents. So I'll turn it over to Deborah and Lisa.
Thank you, Chief. I will start off today. Lisa Bianco and I are going to handle this together. And we'll start off today by having a look at some of the technical aspects of the concept of accommodations. And that's so that we all get together in terms of the language that are used, the legal background to accommodations, and the metrics that we use to track and understand our accommodation issues. So from what we try to do is differentiate accommodations from absences. And absences are when a member or an employee is away from work for a short, medium, or long term. So they're not actually at work performing their duties. They may be on sick leave. They may have accessed the long-term disability plan that the board funds. They may have a WSIB-related injury, and we just saw in the WSIB report the volume that goes on there. So if you're absent from work, you're not participating actively in your job. However, accommodations are quite the opposite. An accommodation is actually involves a restriction of some kind, and we'll have a look at the grounds that define what restrictions are acceptable for an accommodation. But all of the accommodated members are at work. So our challenge then, as the employer, and the board is the employer in this case, is to match the accommodated member with work that maximizes their skills. And we know in policing that we make a significant investment in training and helping our members acquire different skills, those suited to policing. So it's really critical that we maximize that. You'll see as we go through that there are two types of accommodations. One is a temporary one, and that can occur for a number of reasons. The other is a permanent one. So those are the terms that we'll use as we go through the presentation. The legal obligation to recognize and deal with accommodations comes from the Ontario Human Rights Code. So this is the law. It is not an optional matter, and it's actually more than 30 years standing that in Ontario this legislation came about. So the Human Rights Code identifies many actually grounds for accommodation. We've listed the most common ones here, and they include disability. That might be a medical condition, gender, family status, sex, including pregnancy, race, and then there are more grounds. But the ones that we've listed here are the ones that we typically deal with in our environment. And I'll give you a few examples so you can kind of relate the term that's used to situations that we encounter. So, for example, sex, including pregnancy, refers to, we most typically encounter this with a pregnant officer, where pregnancy is recognized as a ground, and they, during the term of their pregnancy, it's really important that we recognize the need for enhanced safety, and that we accommodate them for the duration of their pregnancy in an area that respects that higher need for safety. In terms of disability, we often encounter members with medical conditions, and it could result actually perhaps from something that's an aspect of policing, which we're finding sleep deprivation and difficulties with members who've experienced shift work for a long time. That we would accommodate that by trying to find a position in which the hours of work for the position match their performance, their times when they perform the best. And family status, this is an emerging area, and you'll see this in our data. Family status is, an example would be where a member, or in our case, we know that many of our women members are also married to sworn members, where the couple might have issues that we need to help with. For example, severely disabled children, or children who are recovering from medical situations where they're able to work work, but we need to adjust around their responsibilities at home. Sorry, one more concept. The concept of undue hardship is defined in the code as well. And that's one that you'll hear us talking more about. Undue hardship means that it's something we would measure empirically when we felt that we could no longer accommodate our employees, and we have 2,000 of them. We could no longer accommodate the next issue because of we've exhausted our ability to find suitable work for those members. That's a pretty significant threshold to achieve and to reach, and it's one that would be tested by the Commission, and we would have to include a significant empirical argument to argue that we'd reach that. So here's a did I skip one? Hold on. Here's a feel for the data that goes along with this issue. So when you actually, this is straight from the workforce management report, which we bring to you each quarter. We've updated in this chart with Q1 2018 data, so that column hasn't been before the board yet. But this is the chart that's regularly in the workforce management report. We started to bring this level of detail forward over the last year because of the importance of this issue and the need to understand how the trend that occurs with it, and more importantly, where it occurs, and you'll see that in the next table. This data, I don't know that it's unique to Ottawa Police. It's probably a similar situation in other police services. But when we think of it, we also need to think of the policing environment, because these kind of issues are unique to policing. And we characterize the police environment in our wellness strategy. So we know that it's a very challenging operational environment for anyone to work in. Our members have day-to-day encounters with an unbelievable human suffering, often which they can't action or change. There's unrelenting public scrutiny and oversight. We know that with video now that virtually all our officers can expect that their actions will be recorded and could be displayed across the world now. Our work is characterized by shift work, which can be very difficult on both the member and their family. And it's a very physical job. So the kind of injuries that are likely to come up in policing are unique to policing. We won't always find them in other organizations or industries. So the data that we're showing here will reflect that as well. And it's when we compare, it's important that we would compare apples to apples. So what the data shows is that in Ottawa Police, we have roughly about 150 sworn accommodations each quarter. The trend goes slightly up and down, and you'll see it there that in Q1 actually this year we're dead on 150. And typically the split between the temporary accommodations and the permanent ones is about the same. About 2/3 are temporary in this one side, and 1/3 are permanent. They often change where they are, but roughly the number is in the same magnitude. That's kind of the scope of the challenge that we'll be managing through our accommodation processes and systems, and that's a great number to keep in mind as I take you through the next slide, which gets a little bit more complex, but gives us some feel for where the accommodations are in the organization. And just to remind everyone, these are the formal medical accommodations. We'll talk about the other accommodations under family status and gender and pregnancy, sex and pregnancy. These are ones that have been acknowledged by a medical practitioner and are supported by documentation. I know this looks a little busy, but this gives you another look at that 150 accommodations. So one of the first things that you will see is that where the accommodations are. So of the 150, roughly 2/3 of the accommodations are in the frontline directorate. The exact number is 95. So you can see that the frontline directorate is very impacted by accommodations. The nature of the work there and the shift work occurs there, and they carry the largest number of accommodations. They are also our largest directorate. The 2/3 of the folks who are accommodated within their own position, and you see that in the second column. So roughly 96 out of 150, or roughly 2/3. We've been able to, their restrictions still match their substantive position. And that's often the most easy to administer kind of accommodation. The more challenging ones are the other third, where the member needs to be accommodated outside of their substantive. So their restrictions aren't a match for their substantive position. So we need to look outside of that directorate or position to find them a suitable position that matches their restrictions. You'll see again that most of those accommodations where we have to remove the member from their home directorate also occur in the frontline area. 43 out of the 54, so virtually all of them are in frontline. And that's where we start to feel the operational challenge that accommodations present, because that's a significant number of members to move outside of the directorate. In total, 4% of that number of folks that are accommodated outside of their position, it represents 4% of all positions. What we focus on, though, is the directorate level impact, and you can see that it falls very significantly into the frontline area. As I said, there are other types of accommodations, so here's a feel for some of the trends that we see there. In terms of family status, it was probably not on our radar at all 5 years ago, and this year we have 5 family status arrangements. Sex including pregnancy, we started to take those numbers out of the medical accommodations, and roughly we have 6 accommodations per quarter, meaning almost that's a pretty consistent number, that there are 6 pregnancies at Ottawa Police that require accommodation. This starts to give you a feel for the number on top of medical accommodations that we're attempting to manage so that we can gain the most out of our employees. So there are some important conclusions to draw from that data, and here are a few of them, because I know it can be a little overwhelming with all those numbers flying around. And here are the trends that we see, though. Increasingly, there's a trend because we have opened up, as we spoke about on the WSIB report, the presumptive legislation on PTSD, because we've been more open about non-physical injuries through our wellness strategies. Those are starting to make up more of the accommodations that we need to deal with. And that's actually a good thing for the organization, because it's more important that we be able to have people feel comfortable coming forward with those issues so we can help manage them properly. Family status accommodations, as you saw, that's increasing. And we know from the gender work that with half of our sworn women officers married to a sworn male officer, that will become an increasingly bigger area for us, not only for children, but family status accommodations often involve elderly parents as well, making adjustments for families who are providing care for both children and the elderly. Accommodations on other protected grounds are also coming forward, and we'll see more of that as our workplace and the demographic in our workplace expands. There are 2 significant impacts on the organization from these accommodations. We saw the impact to the frontline directorate when the high number of members who can't be accommodated within there, that means that the frontline directorate is losing staffing, and that has a direct impact on the service that we can offer. It also creates friction within the organization, because often finding an appropriate position for an accommodated member means that they are placed on a priority basis in other positions that might be seen by many as more desirable. So the friction that starts to arise between members is a feeling that the non-accommodated member has lost an opportunity, and that in a system, especially in our environment, which is very seniority-based, that is a difficult challenge for people. So we know that this is that the friction that arises and the operational challenge that we have around accommodations has to be part of how we manage this issue going forward. We've tried to as well approach the accommodation issue. You've seen the data that we've collected, and how we're starting to understand more about how accommodations arise. And these are two of the areas that are going to help us get an even deeper understanding of this issue and how to manage it. So through the wellness project and our wellness strategy, we're working on both sides of this issue. And one is to help change the culture around wellness so that people will be proactive and come forward and identify restrictions, so that we don't have people suffering in silence, that they're in a job that they're well suited to do. We also, though, are trying to work on the resilient side and the proactive health side so that we can help to limit the impact of policing on our members, on their health and their wellness, and reduce the number of accommodations going forward by improved health and wellness. In terms of the gender project, what we learned so much there about the kind of family balance that's required to in policing in order to fulfill the role, especially on the sworn member side where shift work is so common, and how the connection between how many families, two parent sworn families we have, and how the organization will need to help those families as they go through their life cycle. As a result, we've launched the Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion Initiative. Lisa's here to talk a little bit about that, and she's part of it now. And that will help us as well ensure that we stay tuned with our organization on these issues, as well as the legislative environment around it. We know that in order for accommodations and this issue, which is a very challenging one for us, that our members and the stakeholders in our environment, the board, the community, our associations, that we need to maintain and ensure that we have credibility in how we're managing this process. So we've always had a strong process. Our goal is to ensure that it's fair, that it's equitable, and that it's transparent, so that there's trust in it across the organization. So we will always continuously be reviewing and ensuring that our management practices align with legislation and with best practice. And you'll see as we move forward this year that we'll be adjusting some of those processes so that we're clear about them and that our managers have faith in them. There is rigor required, and this is a challenging one because health information or protected ground information is very confidential, and we want to ensure that we honor that, but that there's trust that it's a rigorous process as well. We want people to come forward and use the programs that we put in place, and that's been a key theme of all the work done in this area, going as far back as the Ombudsman's report. That removing barriers will ensure that our members access the programs and that are available to them for wellness, and that's the goal that we want to have them achieve. There's a culture to changing that. There's a significant culture in place which creates disdain for accommodation. In fact, often you could go as far as calling it a prejudice against an accommodation, and that's something that we need to work on. We know we won't be doing this alone, that it's the OPS, the management of OPS, the associations, the Police Services Board, and the community that need to understand this issue so that they see it as a way to help ensure that we get great police service, because having our members be situated in the right job will ensure that we offer great service to the community. I get to turn it over to Lisa Bianco at this point to talk about some of the things that we're doing.
Good evening. So the other prong to this strategy, and the first step in our go-forward strategy, is really to understand how we're deploying our resources and our capacity to accommodate. And one of the first steps in order to better understand how we can better utilize our resources is to complete a bona fide occupational requirement review. So this is to understand systematically the required job elements in all of our sworn job descriptions. Until we have a fulsome process by which we can have confidence in the job requirements that are in our job descriptions, we really don't know what untapped resources we have to accommodate our employees that require accommodation. So this project is really to help us review the job descriptions, weed out those job requirements that are not bona fide, and really understand our ability to accommodate in alternative and more creative ways. This project is based on the Supreme Court of Canada test for what a job requirement can be, and will help us understand which job requirements are bona fide and can be accommodated, which job requirements are bona fide and absolutely cannot be accommodated, and those job requirements which are not bona fide. Given that we are a safety-sensitive workplace, the Supreme Court of Canada test was built precisely for organizations such as ours. It will help us eliminate those job requirements that are systemic barriers, and will ensure that we keep those job requirements that are mandatory to uphold public and community safety. This process is really critical. We need to engage our frontline members so that they have an opportunity to engage in the process, tell us what the work is that they do and how it can be repackaged. It's a great opportunity for operations to rethink how they harness the talent that we have. As the DG explained, we invest a lot in our employees. They have skills and talents that we really need to use more effectively, and this process will help us understand how we can better deploy those resources. This process will also help us tackle that number of 54. So as you saw in the earlier slides, we have 54 employees working outside of their substantive positions. This will help us redeploy those officers into substantive positions and reduce that number of officers that are working outside substantives, which are substantives that are not being done currently.
So, Mr. Chair, that concludes the presentation. Obviously, this is an important HR issue that the organization is dealing with. It's caused a significant amount of discussion internally and externally as well. And that's why it's important that we're at the point where we fully understand the drivers of the issue. We're collecting data now to better understand where it's impacting the organization. And it's going to require some creative solutions because, I talked to colleagues across the province in Canada in policing, and they are all talking about this issue that's impacting all police organizations. And I think you even see this in other sectors as well, as far as the employer's duty to accommodate people that have legitimate restrictions within their work conditions or other grounds under the Human Rights Code. So we are committed to working with the board as the employer, with the associations and our members to sit down and talk about what are those creative solutions that we can come up with together that will help deal with the concerns and the impact of accommodations while still respecting the need and our legislative requirements to accommodate people with respect to the human rights grounds. But also, we've created an environment, we're making progress in creating that environment of wellness in our organization. And this requires a change in our culture to be able to accept and support those individuals that are having those challenges, and to recognize that they continue to be contributing members of our police service, but putting them in a position where the restrictions are respected. So thank you very much to Deborah, Lisa, and the entire team that put this information together, and we're open for questions.
Thank you, Chief and Director General and Lisa for your presentation. We have a couple of colleagues already started, so we'll start with Member Turney and then Hubley. Anybody else for question? Velikat after. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Madam and Mr. Chair. First of all, I do want to thank you for actually putting this in the way of reports. And I think before it was DC Bell, I think he was acting in a different capacity when we were working on this back in, I had to check my notes, it was actually May 2016 when I first brought this forward and said, you know what, I'm getting concerned because I'm hearing it through the membership, so I wanted just to be able to track that information. And so I'm very happy to see it as part of quarterly reports. And I want to make it abundantly clear. We've heard a lot of very legitimate scenarios, so this is not what this is about. This is about making sure that we keep our finger on the pulse and see exactly what's happening. So that being said, I do have a few questions. So back when Post Media reported it back in May 2016, the numbers that we were provided were 160, and it was 99 and 61. And of course, I look at slide number 3, and we start at Q2 2017. Where would that 160 number fit in to this specific slide, knowing that 2016 is missing, which is a completely separate question, but I'm assuming you'll answer that.
Director General.
Mr. Chair, I think the 161 number would. I'm just going to go back a couple slides. So where we have the sworn subtotal, I think at the time probably that the 161 was the subtotal for sworn accommodations. I'll confirm that, but when I've looked at this data before we started publishing it, that split still pretty much stays the same. So it's usually 2/3 are temporary, 1/3 is permanent. So I would bet at that point we were at 161 and probably with that 1/3, 2/3 split.
And that's great. And again, just on part B of that question, if it's okay, the data from 2016, was there a reason why? Because we started in May 2016. I'm sure there's a good reason why we didn't start with data a little further back.
We have more historical data that we were tracking but not publishing. So we started to put it into the quarterly reports about 4 quarters ago, but we'll be happy to put in a summary chart and go as far back as we can, just so that we get a feel for that.
I would certainly appreciate that, because the numbers that are in front of us here now, as great as it looks in Q1 2018, Q2 2017 to Q4 2017 isn't a rosy picture. The trend was going up until Q1 2018. So I'd like to know what happened prior to that. The other thing, you say other types of accommodation, and just to be clear, I assume those other types of accommodation where it says 6 accommodations per quarter related to pregnancy or whatever the case may be. Is that included in these numbers, or is that outside of?
That's on top of.
So, okay, so we're not dealing with that within this one, and I think this is a very important chart to look at right here. So that brings me to other questions about, first of all, what's required for this type of accommodation? Would this be something that, obviously if it's PTSD or there's something serious, you have to address that issue. But is this a simple doctor's note that is suffice, or what's the system? And I'm sure there's a whole list of human rights issues around this, but I just need to know in my mind what's required. A $15 doctor's note, or is this there's more due diligence on it?
Mr. Chair, there would be a far more comprehensive medical review done, and that's Sometimes it's actually a very iterative one, so that the condition, the restrictions of the condition can be acknowledged and then tested by our disability management people.
And on that note, I have heard some municipal police forces across the country that are entering the waters of requiring a WSIB certified doctor to be able to provide that kind of. Have you looked at that, or have we? I brought this up back in 2016 as well. This is nothing new. I just want to know if you've heard anything from the policing channels.
We have the ability to do an independent medical assessment that we have to get agreement with the member to get done, and I think there's a lot of discussions that take place between our disabilities management people and the doctor in order to ensure that we have the right information that outlines the restrictions, because it's not necessarily the diagnosis that's important for us. It's what the restrictions are with respect to their ability to do the work. So there is a lot of go-between between the physician and our staff to better understand what those restrictions could be, and the prognosis and the length of time as far as how long the accommodation is going to be required for. There are, and I think that's, I think where you're getting at is the whole trust and confidence and rigor in the process, and those are the types of things that we are looking at to ensure that there is rigor in the processes. What are the alternative methods that we can ensure that we do have the proper information that's accurate and that can be validated to ensure that we are have the right restrictions in place and accommodating the member.
And thank you for that. And I did bring this back up in 2016 as well about, the 4-year, 5-year horizon for new recruit versus, let's face it, you evolve up the chain very quickly, about stats on, I don't see it here, and this is something we can talk offline about because it gets very granular. Do we know how many are within that, the new recruit window that are taking accommodation? And I'm only asking because maybe it's something we have to look at it ourselves. That's my concern. If we see it's a lot of the first 5-year recruits or constables, maybe it's something we have to look at from ourselves and see what's happening there. Is there a way to get that kind of data? Is this something we can ask for?
I'll need to look into that and just see what kind of confidentiality is around that data. So it's not something I can answer right now, Councillor.
Well, it's pretty broad. They're not going to name people. I'm hoping we pull that kind of information out. And the last one I brought this up.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt, but as far as we have 6 officers that are pregnant at any given time. Right. When you start talking about 6 and releasing ages and all that stuff, it's pretty easy to identify those individuals. So I think we want to be cautious as far as what data we can collect, what we can report on, based on human rights.
Excuse me, with all due respect, Chief, we did say that the 6 were outside of this window, so I was actually just looking within this window. So I think that's a pretty fair question, so if you can report back on that. The other part is related to, and this was brought up in 2016, I brought it up again, are these members that are on leave entitled to be able to work paid duty?
I'll answer that one. So as we stated before, a member who has restrictions with respect to, as an example, shift work, there's nothing preventing them from doing a paid duty that is respective of their restrictions. So somebody that could only work 9 to 5, they can do a paid duty during those hours. Anything that is outside the restrictions, they cannot do. And we would fail a grievance process should we be challenged if we were preventing a person for doing that paid duty that is within their restrictions.
Great. So it's not our own policy that is restricting that.
Can we say you review it case by case, basically? Because case by case is we have to
absolutely. The health and safety.
It's not a.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, good. So it's not a requirement of employment or health and safety, or we can be taken to some kind of tribunal. It's more about a case by case internal policy.
Well, human rights, if we're prohibiting, if somebody is able to do the functions of a paid duty unit of the day, we'd be breaching human rights if we were preventing them from doing that, because our job as an employer is to restrict the restrictions, or to respect the restrictions of an individual.
And this is in line with other municipalities and police forces across the country? We want to be like an exception?
Quite frankly, I don't know exactly what the policies or the practices of other police services. I know that is something that we do because it's the right thing to do, as far as allowing an employee to conduct a paid duty or work assignment during that respects the restrictions is the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, and again, I'm only bringing it forward because I said the exact same hit. It's rinse and repeat from 2016. What I hear from the membership is a new constable gets on, they're on some kind of leave, which absolutely, and then they see them working a football game or a hockey game or something else, and that calls into question, a level of morale that's going around the force. So I just want to identify these things, and I do appreciate, pulling all this data.
Mr. Chair, if they're on leave, they don't work paid duties. So I'm not too sure, if we're mixing a couple of things up here. If they're on sick leave or off on WSIB, they cannot work.
Forgive me, I mean accommodation.
Okay.
Which is, again, another frustration of the membership. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Turney. And just for the record, we did talk to our colleague in the Big 12, and let me tell you, there's no different in other areas than it is in our own city. We have to follow the law. We have to follow the Human Rights Code. We have to follow the WSIB, and we cannot make any. So when we say case by case been review for paid duty or other, well, yeah, case by case is going to be reviewed because it's not every case is the same. But
certainly, I acknowledge that.
But I can tell you, our service is no different than other when it comes to the percentage of the accommodation we're seeing in the province. Member Hubley?
That's a great segue into my first question, Mr. Chair. Would it be possible in the next report, Director General, that you also give us a comparison across, you said you talked to the top 12, across the top 12, and also include Councillor Tierney's point about the paid duty to see if they all do that or not?
Mr. Chair, just on that point, it's going to be very challenging to get access to other police services data because what we're finding is that actually they're not even collecting it to the extent that we are, and maybe be collecting it differently. So we'll certainly query. I know some of the work has been done, but we can come back with the results of what's out there. But I don't believe we're going to have success in being able to compare Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and see this is exactly the same because we collect data differently. But we'll certainly we'll explore it and we'll look at it from a policy perspective from the paid duty.
When we talk about other municipalities or another police service, we're talking about the percentage of the accommodation. I think we cannot go specific. You're right. They're not going to give us the detailed information, but the percentage you identify in this report is no different than what we saw Toronto, Durham, Calgary, Edmonton. So that's the percentage I'm talking about. I'm not talking about specific cases because we know there's a confidentiality.
Yeah, we'll ask the question, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to report back on what exactly that percentage is.
I understood from both your comments that you asked and got answers. So if you did, there has to be information available. If they didn't give you answers, then you're confusing me here because you're saying that you asked and they told you that it was similar. I think it's a good thing as part of this report because this is a very good report. It gives us a great insight into the issue. And what I'd like to see, because listening to my colleagues, what the chair and Councillor Tierney has said, I think that's good information to add into the report going forward. So I don't quite understand why it's an issue to ask for it, but why don't we go ahead and ask and see where we're at when the Director General comes back.
I'm not questioning the need to ask for it. I'm just don't expect that you'll have the rich data that we have. Certainly, in my conversations with my colleagues, the issue around accommodations is on the table being discussed. I've never discussed as far as to the length that they collect data for, but we absolutely will look to see exactly what they do collect.
And Chief, I like the idea that trailblazing here, and maybe other forces will follow your lead on the report that we're receiving here. That would be great news. The other question I had was on that page there, one of the numbers that stick out to me is 25 permanent cases of accommodation in the civilian employees. And that seems high, and I'm trying to get a sense of what would cause an accommodation in, like, for sworn officers, absolutely. As you mentioned earlier, Director General, the nature of the job, there's every opportunity to get injured or temporarily or permanently, for sure, not questioning that. I'm just wondering with the civilians, how are they getting hurt so much?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there are some parallels between the sworn workforce and the civilian workforce in a couple of areas. For example, our comm center, which is over 125 employees, they are also on rotating shifts, and so some of the medical conditions arising from more than 20 years working rotating shifts are also showing up with our civilians, primarily the call center, the comm center. We have in our cell block, the special constables do a lot of very physical work in the cell block, so they can also come up with the kind of injury that our frontline officers do. What I see more in some of my areas, which are more administrative, is that it's disease related. So we may have people with cancer who are recovering doing treatment that requires a change in their schedule, either as a permanent accommodation or a temporary accommodation. So I think it's some similarities and some that's more specific to an aging workforce.
Thank you. And finally, my last question is to do with the marital status designation. Can you explain what that might be? Like, what are the grounds under marital status that one might ask for accommodation?
Can I just clarify, family status or the gender and, sex including pregnancy? I'll just go back up.
Yeah, you've got family here.
And
family status. Yeah.
Lisa will help us out with that.
So there was a case that dealt with family status a couple of years ago. You may be familiar with the Johnstone case. And what Johnstone established for us, it was a Canada Border Services Agency case. And what it established in Ontario, that was a Canadian jurisdiction, Canadian Human Rights Code, but it establishes the same threshold in Ontario, is an obligation on employers to accommodate for family status, which can be various different things. But what Johnstone established for us was that this can be family status duty to accommodate for childcare. So this is something that is very significant for our organization, especially when we learned in our gender project that 42% of our female employees have a partner that's also at the service. So for example, you have two constables who work shift work, married to one another, have children. They have a nanny who provides them consistent child care. If that nanny were to quit, per se, or be sick for an extended period of time, 3 months, let's say, we would have an obligation as the employer to provide some kind of accommodation to them while they're in this period of transition, trying to secure child care. Another example that we saw in the Value Village case in Ontario is elder care. We know that we have an aging workforce, the sandwich generation that is both providing care for their children and care for their aging parents. So if an employee was the only a dependent, they had a parent who was a dependent, they were the only person who could provide care to their parent, perhaps administering medication or the executor of a will of some kind or power of attorney, and there was a need per se to administer this medication every morning at 6 o'clock. That could pose a problem to the employee who's got this legal obligation to their dependent and, expected to be at work in the morning. So family status is a lot more difficult. It's an emerging area of law in the province and in the country. But these are the type of situations that we would see in the area of family status. But the reason I bring up Johnstone is it's about childcare, and that obviously is very, very significant for our organization where we have, two parent households, both working at the organization with very demanding work schedules.
I got to follow that up, Mr. Chair. One question: when you say if both spouses are officers and their nanny quits on them and it takes 3 months to replace, we will accommodate them to stay home and provide child care? Like, what happens if the other spouse doesn't work for the department? That's a real-life thing that happens to people in this city every day. There's challenges with child care. So I'm not quite sure why we would give special status to two people working at the same place.
It's not only for employees that both work at the organization. It could be one person works at the Ottawa Police, someone works somewhere else. We would make accommodation arrangements which perhaps would be day shift hours while the children are in school, and we would provide accommodation from them from working on night shift. It's not only for employees that both work at our organization. We would never allow for the employee to stay home. It would be a modification of perhaps their work hours or their work location or their work duties to allow them to be able to meet those restrictions that involve their family status. Quite honestly, we would, even if the employee works at another organization, it would be incumbent upon us to work with the employees or the other employees' organization to find an alternative. And Johnstone was a revolutionary case in this area because precisely that example of intermittent child care was what CBSA was found to be discriminatory on. So it's a very challenging and emerging area of law, but it's a very real reality that we as the employer are obliged to accommodate for these type of situations.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Lisa, for that answer. When we talk about accommodation, sometimes it seems like people staying home. No, we just accommodate them within different shift or different department to work with. Just speak clear. Okay, Member Velikat, Madame Velikat.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Just a very quick one. Can you explain or expand a little bit under impacts on organization, where you say limits access to career opportunities / career planning? Can you give us some examples or explain how this is impacting on the organization? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we can look at this issue from two sides. One side is that situations arise where a member needs to be accommodated, and they're accommodated in a position, for example, in investigations. Because perhaps their restriction doesn't permit them to carry their use of force or work the shift rotation required on the front line. The member who has been working, their colleague on the front line who was working towards their qualifications and had themselves in line for a job in investigations might see that as very unfair. How is it that by virtue of some kind of condition, the other member is able to land in a very coveted job? So on the one side of it, we see that that's where the friction starts to come between members, that they see an unfairness in that. They perceive an unfairness because they would see it as serendipitous probably that the other member received that assignment. The other side of it, of course, is that if suppose using Member Tierney's example, suppose you were a member who was injured very early in your career and you are in a situation where you permanently need to be accommodated. Have we got a career path for that member? Because at the moment, not all jobs can be performed by them. There are only certain jobs in the organization until we complete our OFR exercise. There are only certain positions in which we've placed accommodated members. And at one point, the members who have been placed have often said, well, now I'm under the stigma of being placed at the front desk. And that's actually, I see that as potentially damaging my career. So we have to be able to manage both sides of that issue, which is to be able for all members to see accommodation as a fair and equitable process, but also to have a career path for people who may early in their career or at any point in their career need to see a true path for themselves in the organization and not in an area that has bias attached to it.
Thank you. So how do you plan on dealing with that one?
Well, okay, first I have to find the goose that lays the golden egg and then, ask it to lay 3 more eggs. But I think the exercise, this is the first step actually, is starting to talk out loud about this issue because it's been the elephant in the room for a long time. And we know we need many views of it. So we're very interested in the board's view, we're interested in the association's view, the members' view as well. This is becoming more a reality of their workplace. So we start with that. We also start with the exercise that Lisa will be leading to look at, well, what are the true job requirements for positions in the organization? We've often said it has to have use of force. You have to be able to work a rotating shift. That's not necessarily the case across the organization. So moving there so that we can see what options are available will help us find a more strategic path. I think we'll start to, as we did with the gender audit, as we have more of a conversation with the members, we'll understand more about what's a way forward that people see as fair and equitable.
And when does the OFSR begin?
We're getting ready to roll out our project team. I just had a staff sergeant assigned to the project, so we're plugging away slowly but surely.
Thank you. Member Blaustein.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One, do we have anything that when an officer signs their contract initially, where it says that they must be willing to work whatever shifts are assigned to them?
I don't think our letter of offer is that specific. No.
Would that be something that maybe needs to be taken a look at? Because I've done shift work myself. I never applied for a job that required shift work until I knew that I had the plans ready for childcare to be able to carry on with my shift work, and I was a single parent. So I understand the issues involved. However, I would never assume to take a position that I knew I could not fulfill as it was known to be. Another question.
So just on that front,
Yeah.
if I can, before you go off to the second question, I think members join recognizing that they're going to work shift work. Stuff happens. People get exposed to very serious incidents that take place, and that takes a toll on them. So they don't have an issue. They're not sick coming into the workplace, but something develops. They develop cancer. They get married and they have children, and there's a family status issue. So things happen after they seek employment. And as the employer, we have a duty under law to be able to respect and to accommodate those. So I agree. Ideally, get people to sign on. You're going to recognize you're going to work patrol or going to work shift work for your entire career. But stuff happens after that, after they're hired, and we have that responsibility to deal with their accommodations.
Absolutely, and I'm not questioning when it comes to issues like cancer or other significant health issues. That's to be assumed, and that's to be fully supported. And I have no issue with that whatsoever. However, one of the factors that you mentioned was exhaustion. Exhaustion happens, but again, that's part of the job, and there are a lot of officers, senior and not as senior, who have been doing shift work for many years, decades, and they keep doing their job. Many of the inspectors and superintendents who have been on working with the OPS or any police service for that matter, a lot of them are on for 30 years doing their shift work, showing up, being present. And so while I do understand that it's definitely a factor, it's part of what you sign up for when you sign up for the job.
Sleep disorders are a recognized medical condition that are brought on by shift work and the lengthy shift work. And I think that's the one thing we're seeing around sleep disorder for our members who have been working shift work for a significant amount of time. They just can no longer function at night. So it brings on risks and liability issues around their ability to work on a midnight shift. So I think we have to be respectful and of those types of medical conditions as well.
Another thing, when we're talking about couple where both the partners in the relationship are both officers and they have child care issues, would it not be able to be, and maybe this is how you are accommodating, where you just make sure they're not working the same shift?
That is definitely something that we explore, especially on an interim basis. If we need to get them through a period of transition while they're securing alternate child care, we normally, as a first resort, is putting them on opposite shifts, making their shift work comparable so that they are able to provide coverage that way. So it's not really a matter of moving substantially. We look creatively at some of these more alternative solutions, especially on an interim basis when we're supporting child care.
Thank you.
Any other question from my colleague? Let's keep in mind sometimes also we just had a gender audit report also talk about how we need to accommodate our member, especially when Lisa's talking about. The executive team and the board and the association will be working together on the accommodation because this is not just one issue. This is a broad issue, and I think we need to work together as a police service, as a board, as an association to make sure, we respect the law of the accommodation and we accommodate the people who need it at the same time, see if there's a better way. Because let me tell you, when we try to find more information from other colleagues in the Big 12, I don't think anyone have more than just the percentage of the accommodation. That's the only percentage we have, and our number is no different than any other large urban center when it comes to accommodation. But I just want to say thank you to the staff, to the Chief, Director General, all the staff prepared this report. This is a good information to have. And please, let's keep in mind, when we talk about accommodation, we're talking about people still working, but not on a job they were working before. So they're not home collecting $100,000 and not functioning. They're just doing different jobs. But it's creating pressure on the organization in other areas because we are accommodating a large number, and that's the number we need to see how could we really wrestle with that number. But the chief committed and the executive team to work all together with the union, and there's also collective agreement in place we have to respect, and we have to work with it. So I want to thank you both, Lisa and Deborah, for a job well done. I know Councillor Turney should be happy because he asked for that information almost a year and a half ago, and today he got a lot more than he can chew on, I think. So thank you, Councillor. So with that, can we, it's okay, he's my son, I can tell him that. So, with that, can we receive the presentation from the Director General that the Ottawa Police Service Board received this presentation for information? Received. Thank you. And with that, that will conclude our meeting in the public portion. I need a motion to move in camera. So moved by Vice Chair Smallwood. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you.